I walked into the office that morning like any other day. The hum of computers and soft chatter in the background, the scent of coffee thick in the air. But something felt off the second I stepped past the security gate. My badge clicked, doors slid open, and I saw it. The project board, the one I had poured every ounce of energy into for the last 6 months, shining under the fluorescent lights, and my name. Nowhere. Just a void where it should have been, like someone had scooped out the proof of my work and replaced it with nothing but empty space. I froze for a second, heart pounding, every nerve alert. I knew this wasn't an accident. They had erased me. My hands itched, not to strike, not to shout, but to plan, to see clearly the battlefield they thought they had won. My mind raced, breaking the moment into pieces, remembering the nights I stayed late, debugging line after line, the weekends I skipped just to see the system come alive. Every detail, every corner, every piece of logic was mine, yet here it was, stripped away in front of me like a cruel joke. But even in that sharp sting of betrayal, there was clarity. I breathed slowly, counted to 5, and whispered to myself, they can take my credit, but they can't take the proof. And that's when I remembered. Every system leaves a trace. Every creation carries a fingerprint, and mine had been hidden carefully, subtly, in ways they would never see unless I showed them. I could feel the weight of the room, the quiet buzz of people walking past, oblivious to the storm behind my calm exterior. I didn't move. I didn't react. I just stood there, letting the reality sink in, letting it fuel me. The laughter from the corner office where my boss was smugly congratulating himself on a job well done hit my ears, sharp like a slap. Everyone else seemed impressed, nodding, smiling, clapping. No one questioned. No one saw the injustice. And for a moment, the rage was delicious, cold, and precise. I could have screamed. I could have stormed in, demanded justice, but I didn't. I never do. That's not my way. My revenge, the real one, is smarter than that. I walked past my colleagues as if nothing had happened, the click of my heels a quiet drumbeat marking my presence, my silence louder than any outburst could be. And in that silence, a plan was forming, sharp and clean, like the edge of a knife waiting to strike at exactly the right moment. I sat at my desk, the light from the screen reflecting off my glasses, and I let myself smile. Not a smile of triumph yet, but a smile of confidence, of control, knowing that every line I had written, every decision, every piece of logic was mine forever, even if they couldn't see it now. I opened the system logs, not to look for mistakes, not to check my work, but to remind myself that the fingerprints were still there, invisible to the world, ready to reveal themselves when the time came. And as I scrolled, as my fingers hovered over the keys, I felt the quiet thrill of power. They thought they had taken everything, but I had already built my escape, my vindication, my silent justice. Every line of code was a sentence in a story only I could tell, and it was waiting for the perfect moment to speak. I thought of the CEO's eyes, scanning the room, oblivious to the brewing storm. I thought of my colleagues, chatting, sipping coffee, their smiles masking nothing, their ignorance blissful. And I realized, as I always do, that patience is not weakness. Patience is strategy. I didn't need them to recognize me now. I didn't need the applause. I didn't need the acknowledgement at this moment. What I needed was the stage, the moment when truth would be undeniable, when the very system they trusted would deliver my vindication in the most undeniable way. And in that moment, I was unstoppable. The plan was in place, hidden in plain sight, embedded in every sequence, every transaction, every record that moved through the system. They could delete my name from the interface, erase it from the presentation slides, even remove it from the reports. But they could not erase the proof. I leaned back in my chair, letting the thrill settle into a calm determination, a quiet fire that would burn until the reckoning came. And I whispered again, softly, almost reverently, "You can take my name from the board, you can try to erase me from memory, but you can never erase what I built." And with that, I turned back to my screen, every click deliberate, every movement calculated, every thought focused. The room moved around me, oblivious to the storm of justice forming behind my calm exterior, and I knew, without doubt, that by the end of the day, the truth would speak for itself, because I didn't need anyone to see me. I didn't need anyone to cheer for me. I just needed them to witness the evidence, and evidence never lies. And so I waited, patient, poised, quiet, letting the tension build like a silent drumbeat that no one else could hear, knowing that the moment of revelation was coming, and when it did, it would be explosive. They had taken my name from the project, yes, but they had forgotten something vital. I was still in control. I was still watching. I was still me. And nothing, not pride, not arrogance, not oversight, could ever take that away. I walked into the conference room and immediately felt the weight of the air, thick and electric, like the calm right before a storm breaks. My boss was already at the front, pointing at slides that carried months of my work, my sacrifices, my late nights, claiming it all with a grin that screamed ownership. He turned slightly as I entered, and for a split second, our eyes locked. His smirk was smug, almost daring me to react. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. My silence, calm and measured, spoke louder than any outburst. I slid into my seat at the back, adjusting my posture, letting the room notice me without moving a muscle. I could feel the subtle shift in energy, the whispers of colleagues sensing the tension, the slight narrowing of the CEO's eyes, curiosity flickering in their gaze, as if they were trying to measure my reaction. My boss started talking, voice smooth, rehearsed, every word claiming brilliance that wasn't his, and yet every misstep, every small exaggeration, was a breadcrumb leading me to the proof I had carefully hidden. I observed the twitch of his hand, the almost imperceptible hesitation before he pressed, "Next slide," and my chest tightened with a quiet thrill. He thought confidence was his, that control was his, but he didn't see the quiet storm building, the calculation behind every line of code I had written, every note I had left for this exact moment. I watched my colleagues, some nodding along blindly, others exchanging glances that whispered doubt, curiosity, or perhaps admiration for the way I held myself. Even in this chaos, I was untouchable. I let the applause wash over him, the shallow congratulations, the pats on the back he so desperately sought. Every laugh he elicited, every impressed nod he collected, only fueled the fire of the plan I had already set in motion. My hands rested lightly on the table, every subtle movement deliberate, my gaze scanning the room, noting every reaction, every twitch, every micro-expression. I didn't need to speak. The room itself was my canvas, and I was painting patience, strategy, and inevitability across every face. The CEO leaned slightly forward, lips pursed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing their features. They hadn't realized that the brilliance on display wasn't coming from the slides. It was already in the system, already waiting for its moment to shine. My boss, oblivious, continued, trying to dominate the narrative, his words smooth but hollow. And then I noticed it. A tiny misstatement, an exaggeration in his explanation, so small no one else would catch it, but glaringly obvious to me. My pulse quickened, not with panic, but with anticipation. I knew how this would unfold. Each misstep, each oversight, was a thread I could pull at, and when the time came, the tapestry of truth would reveal itself perfectly. I could feel the room's energy vibrating softly, undercurrents of tension, curiosity, and unspoken questions bouncing off the walls. I leaned back slightly, crossing my arms, letting the calm settle over me like armor. Every second of silence, every moment I didn't act, was building suspense, tightening the invisible coil that would spring when my plan reached its crescendo. I imagined the CEO's eyes scanning the room, trying to detect what was missing, the faint suspicion that something was off, that maybe the brilliance on display didn't belong entirely to the man at the front. I watched a colleague shift uncomfortably, another glance at me and away, sensing the truth but unable to voice it yet. I let a small, imperceptible smile touch my lips, almost mocking, almost triumphant, because inside I knew the truth was mine, hidden but absolute, a secret waiting for the perfect moment to expose itself. The flicker of light from the projector danced across the walls, across the slides, across our faces, highlighting every subtle movement, every micro-expression, every little imperfection that my boss couldn't hide. And I leaned forward just slightly, eyes locked on the CEO, letting them feel the calm before the storm, letting them wonder if I was aware, letting them sense the power quietly building behind my measured gaze. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears, steady and strong, a rhythm of confidence, strategy, and inevitability. I didn't speak. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Every word spoken by him, every gesture, every attempted assertion of authority was feeding the evidence I had already created, the proof waiting to be revealed. And as he wrapped up, smiling smugly, thinking he had conquered the room, I could feel the tension in the air thicken, the energy of anticipation coiling tighter, invisible but tangible, waiting for the strike that only I could deliver. My eyes scanned the room one last time, noting every reaction, every doubtful glance, every unconscious gesture. I was in full control. I was invisible, yet commanding, silent, yet orchestrating the next sequence of events with precision. The room's laughter, the clinking of coffee cups, the soft shuffle of papers, the faint hum of the air conditioning, all became part of the symphony I conducted. They thought control was theirs, but they had forgotten the one truth no one can erase. Patience is power, silence is strength, and strategy is invincible. And I sat back, letting it all unfold, every detail feeding the invisible crescendo, every glance a note in the symphony of revelation that would soon leave the room gasping, not at the audacity of the act, but at the inevitability of the truth finally coming to light. My chest tightened with anticipation, not with fear, not with rage, but with the quiet, unshakable thrill of knowing that the reckoning was coming, perfectly timed, precise, and undeniable. I smiled to myself, a slow, deliberate smile, because the moment of revelation was near, and when it came, it would be explosive, cinematic, and unforgettable. My boss might have claimed credit, my colleagues might have whispered doubts, and the CEO might have been curious but blind, but I had already won. I didn't need anyone to see it yet. The room itself was my stage, the silence my weapon, the anticipation my ally. And I waited, patient, poised, utterly calm, knowing that the storm I had set in motion would be perfect, unstoppable, and unforgettable. Be honest, what would you do if it was you sitting in that room? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear you. Seba eased into my chair, feeling the subtle vibration of the keyboard beneath my fingers, a pulse of energy syncing with the hum of fluorescent lights above, the faint whir of servers in the corner, the occasional scrape of a chair wheel across the linoleum. The office seemed deceptively calm, but I could feel the tension threading through the room like invisible wires, stretching, waiting. Each click, each breath, was part of a larger rhythm, one that I had orchestrated in silence. My eyes traced the patterns of code across dual monitors, watching lines of logic unfold like streets in a city I alone understood. They thought erasing my name had erased me. They were wrong. Every module, every function, every commit carried my fingerprint, hidden in plain sight, invisible to those who didn't know how to read it. I opened the log files, scrolling slowly, methodically, letting the information bloom across the screen. The colors of syntax highlighting shimmered under the overhead lights, reflections dancing across my glasses. A subtle thrill ran under my skin. My name was there, woven invisibly into timestamps and metadata, tucked in corners no one would look, marked only by patterns I had crafted with meticulous care. They'll never see it. Not yet, I whispered softly, more to feel control than to be heard. The office murmurs, distant typing, a printer cycling through its job, all faded into a quiet background hum, and I felt the pulse of strategy settle in my chest. Fingers hovered over the keys, poised. Every keystroke would be precise, deliberate. I began inserting subtle markers, tiny annotations hidden within functions and logs. Each action measured, each decision a brushstroke, painting a proof no one could erase. I paused often, leaning back to let my eyes roam the office, noting the movements of colleagues, the way a shadow fell across a desk, the angle of sunlight cutting through blinds. Perfect timing. Just wait, I murmured, barely audible, letting anticipation taste on my tongue. Hours stretched, each minute a layer of invisible construction. I traced modules, cross-referenced dependencies, verified hidden connections. The thrill of stealth was intoxicating. No one suspected a thing. The boss wandered past my desk, talking loudly about deliverables, unaware that the system he assumed he controlled bore my signature. I imagined the CEO leaning in, eyebrows raised, scanning the screen, realizing the truth embedded where no one had dared to look. The thrill tightened in my chest, not just of revenge, but of mastery, of creation, of silent victory. Every gesture, every sound, every movement in the office became part of my mental map. I typed, erased, rewrote, and scrolled, leaving breadcrumbs that only I could follow. My heart settled into a deliberate rhythm, matching the silent pulse of the hidden code. The logs were alive, breathing my existence, cataloging my labor, whispering to the future. I imagined colleagues glancing over, puzzled by tiny anomalies, unaware of the proof awaiting the perfect moment. The system was my ally. Patience was my weapon. I leaned forward, resting my fingertips lightly on the keys, and considered contingencies. What if the boss decided to move files? What if a colleague accidentally deleted a module? Every scenario ran through my mind like a film reel, and each possibility had a solution, already encoded in the silent architecture I had built. My lips curved in a faint smile. Let them think they're winning, for now. I breathed softly. The thrill of control, the delicate balance of anticipation, made the office feel both vast and intimately mine. By mid-afternoon, the hidden markers were complete. Every subtle tag, every timestamp, every invisible commit lined up perfectly, like a string of dominoes waiting to fall at the right moment. I leaned back, letting my gaze drift across the polished surface of the desk, the glint of sunlight in the monitor reflection, the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. I felt the quiet satisfaction of preparation, the kind that only someone who had labored unseen could experience. The world outside my bubble carried on, oblivious, and I knew that the reveal, when it came, would not be a shout but a shockwave. I reviewed every line one last time, scrolling slowly, letting my eyes drink in the code, tracing each subtle breadcrumb, imagining reactions, hearing whispers in my head of what they would say. Astonishment, disbelief, respect begrudgingly given. The system was ready. I was ready. And as the office clock ticked forward, I felt the pulse of inevitability settle in me. Every moment I had worked, every hidden annotation, every quiet hour was about to speak louder than words ever could. I didn't rush. I never rushed. The moment would come, and when it did, they would see me, not just as the coder, but as the orchestrator, the silent architect, the one who had built the invisible proof they couldn't erase. I rested my hands lightly on the keyboard and let the quiet satisfaction wash over me. My name was there. My labor was there. My mind was ahead, and soon everyone would know. Until then, I waited, patient, calculated, unseen, untouchable. I slid out of the meeting with the same calm I'd worn when I walked in, like a quiet aftershock that no one else could feel, and the hallway swallowed me in a thin ribbon of light and shadow where my breath sounded louder than it should. The office felt different now, charged, each step echoing in the space between the hum of the HVAC and the distant clink of a coffee mug, and somewhere beneath that ordinary noise, a current had begun to pull, unseen, toward the point I had carefully set. I walked back to my desk with the slow certainty of someone who knows the choreography of a room better than the people on its stage, my heels clipped softly against the tile, the sound a subtle metronome that matched the cadence of the plan I'd already put in motion. I sat down and let my hands rest on the keyboard like a musician tuning strings, listening to the ambient orchestra, the shuffle of paper, the distant murmur of a discussion, the faint mechanical sigh as a printer finished a job. The world kept doing what it always did, ignorant, practiced in its daily rituals, while the architecture of truth I had embedded began to hum faintly beneath the surface. I opened the dashboard and let my eyes wash over the logs, the way someone reads a map, looking not for terrain but for the footprints I had left. The hidden tags pulsed there like lighthouses, barely visible, positioned just so, each one ready to flash into clarity when the tide I'd planned came in. I didn't rush. Haste would blur the edges. Strategy loved slow hands and quiet breaths. I scrolled, tracing chains of events backward and forward, making sure each breadcrumb aligned with the next, that nothing could be misread as coincidence, that every timestamp and every metadata node pointed to one undeniable conclusion. I toggled a view, then another, watching reflections of my face in the dark gloss of the monitors, my eyes steady, my jaw loose, and thought of how different the same room would look when the lights finally shifted and the truth cast new shadows. A colleague passed by my cubicle with a casual, "Hey, She didn't see the way my fingers paused over the keys, didn't notice the micro-smile that softened the corner of my mouth. I typed a single command and watched the log generator spool, like a soft-footed drumbeat that only I could hear. The triggers were subtle. A delayed echo in a background job, a bracketed annotation disguised as a routine comment, a micro-pattern of commits tied to my developer handle that would surface in the user-facing logs when certain conditions met. It was elegant, not loud, justice that arrives like the tide, not like a thunderclap. I thought through contingencies as if rehearsing a play. If the files were moved, the mirror index would reveal the original. If a module was renamed, the checksum signature would point straight back to my contributions. If someone ran a scrub, an archival snapshot would remain immutable. Each what-if had an answer already encoded. They don't even know which game we're playing. I breathed under my breath, the words more balm than boast. The afternoon light slanted across the desks, cutting clean lines across the floor, and in the reflection on a colleague's monitor, I saw the boss stride by, chest out, smile practiced, hands already forming the motions of ownership. He thought the narrative belonged to him. He hadn't read the fine print. He hadn't seen the architecture. He never looks that closely. I did. I always do. The beauty of this kind of work is that it rewards the patient, the meticulous, the small mercies of repetition and revision. It's the slow work of someone who builds not for applause, but for evidence. I checked the log rotation once more, watched a stream of entries that would, in a specific sequence, pull the curtain back in the conference room where ego had been performing. I imagined the room when they watched it unfold. The CEO's eyebrows folding, the boss's smile flattening into something thinner, colleagues leaning forward as the air changed its scent from casual confidence to sudden attention. I pictured the ripple, first disbelief, then the soft intake of breath, then the inevitable, uncomfortable pivot toward recognition. That image felt like a warmth in my chest, not triumphal but righteous. It was the sound of truth being rearranged in real time. Even now, I moved with the outward calm of someone filing paperwork, eyes flicking to calendar invites, hands moving spreadsheets, offering a brief, polite response to a teammate asking if I wanted to grab coffee, while underneath I was tightening the last knots. I inserted a seemingly innocent audit log that would, under the exact demo conditions, call up a developer credit in plain text across the presentation console. That single line was the one the world would notice. Everything else was scaffolding, invisible until the structure held. I set timers. I validated dependencies. I let the architecture breathe and watched how its small movements predicted the larger wave. The craft is in the restraint. You let the other side make noise and reveal their own gaps, and then you let the evidence speak, because evidence is a dialect everyone understands. Twice, a team lead stopped at my desk to ask a question about deadline priorities, and I answered with the same composed cadence I'd used all day, deflecting and fixing and making the ordinary look ordinary. Inside, I practiced the face I'd present when the room went quiet, soft, measured, as if surprised and humble rather than triumphant. The optics mattered. Dignity carries the weight of truth farther than a shout. I imagined later, in the hush after revelation, leaning against a window, the cityscape beyond a blur, hearing the low murmur of colleagues sorting their own recalibrations. What would they say? Surprise, regret, apology, maybe not all at once, maybe not even honestly, but the pattern would change. Systems learn, people, sometimes. That change, small as it might be, rippled outward in ways that matter. The office clock inched forward. My pulse matched the slow tick, a human metronome steady with patience, I ran through the sequence one more time. Trigger, surface, context, confirmation. Each piece had to be undeniable on its own and catastrophic in ensemble. I made minor adjustments, tightened a conditional here, added redundancy there, because perfection is an accumulation of small, relentless adjustments. The printer's soft cough sounded like applause to my ears, a private joke. I allowed myself a breath, a tiny exhale that tasted of coffee and focus, and I whispered, "Soon." It wasn't hubris. It was the calm of someone whose work was about to be seen for what it had always been. People filter truth through convenience and pattern. My job was to break the pattern gently enough so the truth couldn't be dismissed. And as the afternoon light thinned toward evening, the office settling into its habitual rhythm of departures and last-minute emails, I closed my eyes for a moment and let the inevitability of the plan anchor me. The stage was set, the cues in place, and all that remained was for time to reveal the design. I glanced again at the monitors, my reflection superimposed over the cascade of lines, and felt a kinship with everything I had built. Quiet, exacting, designed to outlast the careless claim of credit. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about balance, about restoring the ledger so the world could tally honestly. I smoothed my shirt, tapped a short reply to the group chat about tomorrow's stand-up, and stood. The world saw a calm developer heading home. I carried something else, a small, patient storm, a map of inevitability. I walked toward the elevator with the same slow, unhurried step I'd used all day, feeling the shift in the air like the first warmth of a wind change. Tonight, the evidence would wait. Tomorrow, it would speak. I stepped into the box as it hummed shut, pressing the button for the lobby, and in that small enclosed space between floors, I let myself smile fully for the first time all day, not from triumph, but from a deep satisfaction that comes from doing the work right. The doors opened to a city that would feel unchanged, but inside me, the world had already tilted, quietly, precisely, toward a new axis of truth. Highlights. Lyric observes and maps colleagues' behaviors while finalizing trigger points, inserts subtle, redundant markers in logs and metadata, rehearses contingencies for file moves to use deletions, keeps calm outwardly while internally tightening the plan, uses timing, optics, and patience to ensure the reveal will be undeniable, includes brief whispered lines, "They don't even know which game we're playing," soon, to humanize and heighten suspense. I walked back to my desk, the late afternoon sunlight cutting slivers across the polished floor, reflecting off monitors, water bottles, and polished desk edges in fractals of light. The office had thinned. Most of my colleagues were gone, their laughter and chatter replaced by the soft hum of computers, the mechanical whisper of printers, the occasional shuffle of a janitor's broom far down the hall. The quiet wasn't just silence, it was fertile space, the kind of calm that sharpens every thought, every calculation. I could feel the rhythm of it, syncopated to the pulse of my own heartbeat. Today was the day. Not the reveal itself, not yet, but the final arrangement, the last tuning of the invisible machinery I had spent months constructing. I sat down, sliding my chair slowly into position, feeling the faint vibration of its wheels across the tile. Fingers hovered above the keys, flexing, loosening like a pianist before the opening chord. My monitors glowed softly, a constellation of spreadsheets, scripts, and dashboards, each window a note in the symphony I was about to conduct. The lighting was perfect, soft overhead fluorescence mingling with the dying natural light, bouncing off reflective surfaces to create subtle shadows. Shadows that would hide the invisible breadcrumbs, even as they illuminated the moment I wanted them to shine. I leaned forward, eyes scanning the logs, the code, the hidden tags, and metadata one last time. Every line had a purpose, every annotation a secret. I imagined the moment of reveal, the CEO leaning forward, eyes narrowing, the boss's smug grin faltering. Just a fraction. Colleagues exchanging glances that said, "Something is happening here, and I don't know what it is." I ran through the scenario like a rehearsal. First, the screens would update. Then, the hidden markers would surface, subtle but undeniable. Finally, the credit line, embedded in the very system they trusted, would appear where no one expected it. I could almost see the flicker of disbelief crossing the room, almost hear the suppressed gasp, feel the shift in the atmosphere. I moved deliberately, dragging one terminal window to align perfectly with another, opening the logs that would act as the trigger. Each click, each scroll, each keystroke carried weight. I traced functions, verified sequences, double-checked every dependency. The tactile feedback of keys beneath my fingers was familiar and comforting, a rhythm that reminded me of late nights, solitary hours, and the painstaking precision that had brought me here. "Everything has to be perfect. Everything," I whispered, low and private, my voice barely audible over the ambient hum. The thrill was subtle, tight in my chest. Not arrogance, not triumph. Yet, only anticipation, patient and controlled. I adjusted the chair, leaned back just slightly, feeling the stretch along my spine, a small gesture, unnoticed, that helped me settle my body into the calm I needed. I reviewed the alignment of logs and metadata again, confirming that any attempt to manipulate or claim the work by others would be rendered impossible. Every piece of evidence pointed unerringly to me, yet remained invisible until triggered. The office had become a theater. I was the director, and the room itself was my stage. I imagined the CEO scanning the dashboard, the subtle confusion as something unexpected emerged, the boss's eyes widening ever so slightly. I felt their reactions like vibrations through the floor, imagined the whispered questions, the glances, the shifting of posture as the truth started to surface. My lips curved in a faint smile, almost imperceptible, the kind of smile that only someone who knows the end of the story could wear. I reached for a cup of coffee, the ceramic cool against my palm, the aroma grounding me in the moment. I sipped, letting the warmth travel slowly down my chest, a small comfort before the storm. My hands returned to the keyboard, fingers dancing across keys with quiet deliberation, adding tiny redundancies, subtle checks, final confirmations. Every action was a note in the crescendo, every micro-movement deliberate. The office lights reflected in the screen, tracing the outline of my face, my eyes focused but calm, a mask that hid the calculated excitement beneath. I ran through contingencies silently. If a file had been moved, a checksum would point back to me. If a script were accidentally executed too early, the trigger had safeguards. If someone peered over my shoulder, they would see routine work, not the orchestration unfolding underneath. My mind traced possibilities with the precision of a chess master, 3, 4 moves ahead, envisioning the unfolding consequences. Each imagined reaction sharpened my focus, tightened my control. The hum of the printer started again, its mechanical voice joining the ambient chorus. I let it mark time, the rhythm of preparation. I tapped a few keys and watched the code run, simulated the final display. Everything aligned. I breathed slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation sink into my bones. The thrill of invisible power, of justice unseen but inevitable, coursed quietly through me. I leaned forward slightly, fingers poised above the keys, as though waiting for a conductor's baton. I imagined the moment the CEO would read the logs aloud, the subtle shock of recognition, the boss's pause, the colleagues leaning closer. The dominoes were arranged perfectly. I visualized their reactions again, each heartbeat matching the rhythm of mine, each movement a silent cue in the unfolding drama. I whispered again, soft, almost reverent. Soon. Very soon. The words were for me alone, a tether to focus, a way to let the thrill of control remain calm and contained. Minutes passed, the office quiet except for the occasional sound of typing and distant laughter fading into the evening. I reviewed every marker, every hidden annotation one last time. The system was ready. I was ready. My posture relaxed slightly, but my mind remained sharp, scanning, calculating, anticipating. I imagined the ripple that would follow, the subtle recalibration of perceptions, the rearrangement of acknowledgement, the quiet but undeniable proof that my work could not be stolen, erased, or denied. Finally, I leaned back, resting my hands lightly on the desk, eyes drifting to the window, to the city stretching beyond. The late sun painted gold across the walls, illuminating every imperfection, highlighting shadows, reflecting patterns I had memorized. I allowed myself a small smile, not loud, not triumphant, but full of the quiet satisfaction of preparation, of patience, of mastery. Tonight, the work would rest, the stage would wait, and tomorrow, the storm would arrive. I was calm. I was confident. I was ready. And nothing, not arrogance, not oversight, not ignorance, could undo the architecture of truth I had built. You won't believe what happens next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Heavens. I stepped into the conference room with the calm of someone walking onto a stage already theirs. The door clicked shut behind me, soft, final, sealing the room into a chamber of anticipation. The lights overhead reflected off polished surfaces, bouncing soft golden tones across laptops, glasses, and the glossy table. The hum of the air conditioning was steady, almost soothing, but underneath it all, I felt the subtle electricity in the room, an invisible current that vibrated in response to the tension I could sense around me. My boss was at the front, his smile tight, a thin veneer of control masking nerves he didn't yet recognize. The CEO sat forward slightly, fingers steepled, eyes scanning the slide deck that boasted months of my labor under someone else's name. Colleagues shuffled in their seats, pens tapping lightly against notepads, subtle murmurs weaving through the room like threads of curiosity and doubt. I let the silence stretch a heartbeat longer than necessary, feeling the tension coil and gather like a spring ready to snap. I approached the terminal, fingers brushing the keys, each touch deliberate. A single command, executed flawlessly, and the dashboard began its transformation. Logs updated in real time, hidden markers I had planted months ago surfaced, subtle annotations glowing faintly on the screens. And then, the line that mattered most, the declaration I had engineered meticulously, appeared in plain view. Developed by Lyric J. Evans. The effect was instantaneous. The boss froze, hand mid-gesture, his eyes widening fractionally before darting to the screen. I could see his jaw tighten, the small twitch at the corner of his mouth betraying disbelief. The CEO blinked, twice, slow and deliberate, then leaned forward, a subtle shift of body weight that signaled acute attention. Colleagues whispered to one another, heads tilting, eyes scanning, some frozen, some shifting uneasily in their seats. Micro-expressions flashed across their faces: astonishment, hesitation, dawning comprehension, silent admiration. I noted each flicker, each subtle movement, the small gasp from one colleague barely contained behind a hand. I stayed calm, every breath measured, a quiet anchor in the eye of the storm I had orchestrated. The room's energy shifted. The patterns of dominance and control that had been established by my boss moments ago were now fractured, realigned by a single line of text that bore the truth. I felt a thrill, not of arrogance, but of satisfaction, the kind born from meticulous planning and the inevitability of justice. They can't be serious, my boss muttered, barely above a whisper, voice cracking slightly under the weight of realization. I let the comment hang, subtle, untouchable, a marker of my own control. My lips curved in the smallest of smiles, invisible to anyone else, unnoticed except by me. The CEO leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly, processing, recalibrating the hierarchy of credit and competence that had just been upended. One colleague's fingers drummed nervously on the table, a subconscious rhythm of awe and disbelief. Another clasped her hands to her mouth, eyes wide. The office lights bounced off the polished floor, reflecting glimpses of faces twisted in disbelief, the glow of monitors illuminating small but powerful revelations. I observed everything with the meticulous attention of a strategist. How the boss's shoulders slumped imperceptibly, how the CEO's lips pressed together, how each colleague's posture subtly shifted, eyes following the screen, minds racing, hearts betraying their pulse in microbeats I could feel across the room. Every movement, every hesitation, was part of the orchestration I had rehearsed internally for months. A whisper escaped me, barely audible. All in plain sight, and they never saw it coming. The thrill of control pulsed softly in my chest, an undercurrent to the calm exterior I maintained. Each keystroke I had made, each hidden log entry, each annotation, had led to this precise, irreversible moment. The boss attempted to regain composure, gesturing vaguely toward the slides as if to reclaim authority, but his movements were clumsy, forced, and meaningless against the inevitability displayed on the screen. The CEO's eyes tracked the log updates, scanning the timestamps, metadata, and annotations, my fingerprints laid bare, unerasable. Colleagues murmured questions, tentative, almost reverent. "Wait, this is hers." One whispered, the words barely carrying over the soft hum of the AC. Another leaned closer to her neighbor, whispering, "She did all of this?" I felt the subtle shifts in the room's energy as awe and recognition replaced the earlier ignorance. I allowed myself a deep, controlled breath, savoring the weight of the moment, the quiet triumph that no words could convey fully. My heart beat steadily, synchronized with the rhythm of revelation unfolding exactly as I had envisioned it. Every detail I had labored over, the subtle timing, the alignment of logs, the visual cues, the redundancy, the contingency, had converged perfectly. I could see it in their faces. The boss's initial shock giving way to a pale acknowledgement, the CEO's raised eyebrows signaling both surprise and grudging respect, colleagues' subtle nods and widened eyes betraying admiration for the precision and foresight I had displayed. I let the room settle into its new reality. The screens glowed softly, the logs scrolled naturally, annotations visible yet elegant, undeniable. The proof was absolute, beyond manipulation, beyond denial. I had orchestrated the storm, timed it flawlessly, and delivered the silent but unmistakable verdict. This work was mine, and mine alone. As the CEO's eyes swept across the room, lingering briefly on me, I felt the quiet satisfaction settle like warm light in my chest. The room buzzed with whispers, subtle gasps, movements of realization, the kind that shift dynamics, recalibrate respect, and honor true labor. I allowed myself a small, private smile. I had waited, planned, and executed. And now the truth, undeniable and radiant, spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. I leaned back slightly, resting my fingers lightly on the desk, heart still steady, and whispered to no one in particular, "Justice. Finally." The calm triumph filled every fiber of my being, a satisfaction born not of vindictiveness, but of patience, skill, and the certainty that the work itself had delivered the truth. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of monitors reflecting softly on the polished table, the afternoon sun slicing through blinds, casting long stripes across the office. The hum of computers, the subtle whir of the printer, even the quiet scrape of a chair, each sound felt amplified now, as if marking the new rhythm in the room. Everything had shifted. Nothing would ever feel the same. Colleagues sat quietly, whispers soft, glances exchanged. I could see their surprise, their hesitation, and in some, admiration, the subtle acknowledgement that what had just unfolded was extraordinary. Even the CEO's gaze, steady and measured, held a newfound recognition. The boss's shoulders had tensed, then relaxed slightly, an imperceptible nod to reality. Every small gesture, every micro-expression, confirmed what I already knew. Truth, patience, and authenticity always prevail. I let a slow breath fill me, feeling the quiet power of control and satisfaction. Integrity doesn't shout. It endures, I murmured softly, words meant for myself, a tether to focus and humility. Months of invisible labor, nights alone debugging and refining, weeks of patience, had culminated in this undeniable, quiet victory. This wasn't about revenge, it was about illuminating truth, proving that work done well cannot be erased. The office seemed to settle into a new cadence. I noticed subtle shifts. Colleagues leaning forward, curious but respectful, glances that communicated awareness and recognition, a soft tension replaced by respect. The cultural weight of the moment struck me, a testament that Black excellence, diligence, and intelligence, often overlooked, can prevail with strategy, patience, and resilience. I traced my hand along the keyboard, feeling the tactile memory of every keystroke, every hidden annotation, every line of code I had carefully crafted. Each detail had mattered, and now it spoke for itself. A whisper escaped me. Do it right. Do it true. They can't take that from you. The truth of the work had outlasted ego, arrogance, and oversight. It was proof that strategy and integrity, combined with perseverance, are unstoppable. As I stood, straightening my posture, I took in the room, the lighting, the reflections, the small gestures of recognition, the whispers of realization. The city outside shimmered faintly, but inside, a quiet storm of acknowledgement had settled, lasting, indelible. Every subtle movement, every shifted glance, every muted nod carried the resonance of lessons learned. Honesty, patience, strategy, and resilience always leave a mark. I smiled softly, not in triumph over anyone, but in the satisfaction of justice fulfilled through diligence, not confrontation. The storm had passed, but the impact would echo, proof that true work, done with integrity, patience, and precision, cannot be erased. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this story. If it spoke to you, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us who we are.